am going to invite you to time travel with me. So fasten your seatbelts. Everybody get tucked in properly, and we're headed for the 1950s. I was barely 5 years old when my mother and I flew from New York City to Birmingham, Alabama. The plane landed hard. It wasn't that type of landing that passengers applaud for, quite the opposite. But the real impact of that landing didn't happen until we deplaned. When we got off the plane, I looked at my glamorous, commanding mother and I said, "Can I go to the bathroom?" And she looked at me, and I noticed that there was a discernible change in her demeanor. And what my mother did was she pulled an ugly little hat out of her purse and she pulled it over my hair, making sure put every strand of my hair underneath that hat. And she looked around and she said, "There, go alone." When I came back, my mother was exactly where I left her, but she was unrecognizable to me. Something had happened. This woman who walked through the world as if she owned the sun had removed her wide brim hat. She had taken off her sunglasses, and she seemed small, so much smaller than when I went to the restroom. It took me decades to understand exactly what was happening that day. You see, my mother, usually with her beautiful brown skin a source of pride, it had become a liability in that moment. And that liability created a space where she had to rearrange me into a reasonably passable little white girl, and she shrunk herself so that she could appear to be my colored nanny. I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget that moment because that day, as a little one, I had no idea of what the word oppression meant. I didn't know what it meant, but I learned that day what it felt like. It felt like the smothering hot air when we left that Alabama airport. It felt like a woman who I looked up to and loved so much folded herself in half for our survival. And it also felt like the whisper that I can still hear now when I said, "Mom, can I please take off this hat?" And she said, "Not yet, baby, but soon." All of this was just so I could use a clean bathroom in Alabama in the 1950s. Now, 1950s, this was not an exception. This was a rule. The air was engineered with a thick sort of violence that created everyday humiliations where you could sit, where you could eat, where you could stand, where you could learn, or where you could even simply exist. And this violence that existed in the air created feelings of othering. Some were elevated and some were made to feel less than. And the allowance of that culture to grow, particularly when you look at children as they are growing up, that sort of environment was confusing and it was hurtful. But we breathed that air for many decades. Now, I will tell you that even though I didn't know what oppression meant. Learning how it felt is something that I will never forget. And it did become the work of my life. I went on to continue to study and learn as much as I could about how to fight this thing. How could I make the world better? How could I help people understand what the world did to us when it taught us that we maybe should be afraid of people who are different from ourselves? And this wasn't an easy thing to understand because it was happening inside us. It was happening in an unconscious way that we didn't even realize it happened. And we're going to go now into the 1970s. And I am no longer that little girl, thank God, in that uber ugly hat. Okay. Now I'm a mom who could dress myself, and I am watching my little boy playing in a shopping center in New Jersey. And as he was playing with another little boy, a little white toddler, the two of them are doing what children do when they're uninhibited by us adults telling them what they can and can't do. They were just having such a good time laughing and playing. And in an instant, everything changed. What happened was the white toddler's father saw the two boys playing. And he went over and he snatched his son away from mine. And he shouted a racial slur, the N word, in the space right between the two boys. And he held his son up and he shook him and he said, "Don't ever let me catch you playing with a black child again." Two little children, now confused and now aware that something about their connection was wrong. The two boys burst into tears, as did I. And I ran over and I picked my son up and I held him to my chest. And there were so many emotions going through me that day in that moment, some anger, some fear. But then I began to feel something else, compassion and love. Because what was happening in that moment was the reality that there were memories that were being laid down in those little boys' brains. My son was receiving a message that said, "Is this what life is going to do to me when I'm simply being myself?" And the other little boy, his neural pathways were developing a memory that said, "What is wrong? And it's not safe to play with someone who looks like this." So this brings me to what has me here in front of you tonight. And my question for you is, what is the love that you are willing to stand for? Is it a partner, a spouse, a child, a community, a beloved pet, a parent, a faith, the planet? What is the love that allows you to look at what you are willing to pay attention to and identify? Because I believe that our lives depend on love. And if that is true, if our lives depend on love, then if we do not name that love and nurture that love and stand for that love, that is not optional. It's oxygen. It's what keeps us all breathing. It's what keeps us all moving. It's what keeps us all moving together. Because even in the most loveless places, love is always there. In that airport, when my mother had to take that protective stance for me, that was love. Because love is not always soft and sentimental. Love is sometimes fierce and protective. Love is a message and a gift that we've all been given that sometimes we forget the power of. Because no one's love is small, no one's love is private, no one's love is powerless. Your love is a portal to opportunity, an opportunity to create a world where everyone can understand how important it is to stand shoulder to shoulder with one another. We're living in a polarized world. What is our greatest gift to bring to this world? And that gift is love. I just want you to know that each and every one of us, when we have an individual day where we are feeling some kind of way that isn't necessarily positive or loving, that energy is going up into the collective energy of the world. And if the world feels heavy, we are part of that heaviness, or we can contribute to lightening it up. So let's fast forward a little bit more. Please keep those seatbelts on. We may encounter a little bit of turbulence, so I want everyone safe. We are now in 2016, and I had begun to study something called the Enneagram. So in 2016, I went to Minneapolis and I attended an Enneagram conference. And 2 weeks before I got there, there had been an incident in Minneapolis. A man named Philandro Castile, young black man, had been fatally shot at a routine car stop in front of his girlfriend and her daughter. When I went to the conference, I had some expectation that there would be some mention of it, that maybe we would have a moment of silence and maybe we would say something that was encouraging about the things that were beginning to happen, particularly in that city at that time. I went through the whole conference and got to the last day. It was never mentioned. So on the last day, when the panel was assembled and participants could ask questions, I really don't even remember getting up out of my seat, but I walked to the microphone and I looked at a sea of white faces and I asked the question. I said, where is the diversity in our organization? There are horrible things that are happening in the world to people of color, to people who identify as anything other than heterosexual. There are things that are happening, and this is an organization that is all about helping us to unearth the best of who we can be. What are we going to do about it? The room was quiet. And when someone tried to respond, it was too little, too late. It felt inadequate. I had pulled the pin from the grenade and tossed it into the middle of the room. And I knew that the people in that room might not ever look at me the same way again. But I was long past time for waiting for something to happen and waiting for someone else to take responsibility for that. And so that was the day that I realized that I had transitioned from being just an Enneagram practitioner to an Enneagram activist. I loved that organization and I loved that community, but I wanted that community to love me back. Now, we're about to land, so please keep your seatbelts on until I announce that it's all right and you hear the bell to take them off. It's 2025, and once again, I am going to another International Enneagram Association conference. And the conference, coincidentally, because we move it around, is being held in Minneapolis once again. And this time, when entered, I entered not as a participant, but I entered as a president of the International Enneagram Association. This is what it means to put love into action. It is not stepping back and staying away. Love does not look away from hard things. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. We can't go around it. We can only go through it. But we can only go through it together. I want to say this to you in closing. Sometimes we confuse tolerance with love, but tolerance is a hallway. Love is the house that we are building together. And if someday, not too soon from now, someone that you love, and maybe it will be a younger person, says to you, "Where were you when humanity was being dismantled, when people were being marginalized, when it was okay for cruel acts to be perpetuated upon people? Where did you stand?" I hope that your answer can be, "I chose not to stand in the hallway of tolerance. I chose to cross over. I chose peace. I chose unity. I chose love. And I chose it for you." Thank you.